Welcome everybody. It's a treat to be here today with Ken and Julia Yonetani to discuss their wonderful work that we've just finished installing at NGA Contemporary. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of this land, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, and their elders past and present. It's wonderful today to see quite a number of artists in the audience, to see members of Julia and Ken's family here, to see a lot of contemporary collectors who we treasure in Canberra, and also to thank the collectors who have loaned a work, Japan, to the gallery. So thank you very much for that, and we're delighted to have you with us. And what we're going to do today is have a talk about the context of the work that you're going to see down at NGA Contemporary. And I have to say that when I first came across the work that Ken and Julia were doing in a collaborative way, I became very excited by the idea of their work for NGA Contemporary. It coincided very neatly. I have to say it's been a really short time frame that we had to work on this. I think Ken and Julia came in June this year. I'd contacted them earlier in the year, and we had a talk with our director, Gerard Vaughan, and he was very keen for us to try using that NGA Contemporary space for an installation rather than the idea of a group show. So to really open it up. So you'll see when we go down there, there are walls that have been taken out, and we've really tried to make a strong installation with a white component of the salt pieces in the front, and then the glowing chandeliers. You get a little glimpse of them on that screen there, you know, of the chandeliers in the back. So you get this idea of the opulence and the extraordinary nature of the salt table. But then, as we're going to see as we have this talk today, it's underpinned by some of the most important global questions that are facing the world today. Now, Ken and Julia started collaborating in 2009, and their work, first of all, Ken's work was shown in the Venice Biennale, and that was the occasion when Ken and Julia were doing collaborative work, and then their work's been shown in the Singapore Art Museum, a really big survey, and this is the first survey show that brings together the different components of their work in Australia. Some of them have been shown independently. So to have a look at the place where both of these artists were born, both Ken and Julia, Tokyo. I think you were born in the early 1970s. Can you tell us how you came to...
Well, we won't go into detail.
Not too much detail, okay. But your family was living in Tokyo, weren't they, Julia?
They were, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
And Ken had been born there. And in fact, one of the things that's very interesting with Ken and Julia is that they didn't actually start off as artists. And Ken, you might like to tell us a little bit about your very different beginnings, very different from a lot of artists. So we're having a look at the environment at the moment that you started off in. So can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
My parents actually pressured me to study. My father accountant, so I just got a pressure from my parents, and then I became a financial broker in Tokyo. After graduation, I got a Bachelor of Economics, and then this is my office. It's foreign exchange market, and it's really stressful working place. And see the boss guy, he's my coworker. He's already 20, but already gone. And then I didn't want to, become like that. And then I quit in 3 years, and then searching my life, kind of.
And so, how did you come to change to work in the art field?
First, I came to Australia in 1999 with Julia. Julia actually started studying her PhD at the ANU in Asian Studies, and I didn't know what I want to do, and then kind of searching my life. It's so frustrated, and then Julia got a scholarship in Japan. and I just follow her. But before coming back to Japan, I actually applied a open class ceramics course in art school.
Right.
Yeah, here in Canberra, ANU Art School,
yeah.
and then I learned a bit wheel.
The potting wheel,
Yeah,
and so
potting wheel.
so are these images though that you're showing on the screen here?
Yeah,
is this,
it's in Okinawa. I found a good place to work. This is my boss, and he's really calm, and so just a traditional pot I was making every day, 6 days a week.
so was this before or after the art school?
Yes, after the
After,
art school
okay.
experience, just the one semester, yeah,
Okay.
with undergrad students.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then you went back to the art school.
Yeah.
So we're going to come back to that
I
in a
passed
minute.
the test to enter this workplace because I just done a little bit, wheel.
Yes. So quite a change
Yeah.
from the stock exchange
Yeah, very
and
calm.
going into this much calmer
Pay is nothing,
environment.
but
Pays
yeah,
nothing.
more happiness.
Yeah. And so you two met in Japan or in Australia?
We met in Tokyo.
In
yeah,
Tokyo.
Yeah, before we came to Canberra.
Right, right.
Long time ago.
Yeah. And, I think these images are quite telling when you have a look at the development of Ken and Julia's work and that sense of patience and working in quite a meditative way and a disciplined way that you got from your master in Okinawa. And that was actually, is this the place where the studio was? The potting?
It's a kiln.
It's
Kiln.
a kiln. It's a dragon
Beautiful.
kiln. So 4 times a year, we made a firing, and thousands of pot put them inside of the dragon kiln, and it's quite interesting experience.
Yeah. So here are some of the more traditional works that you were making around that time. Just show them.
Yeah, they just keep making southern pot every day, and I just made a body, and then my master is carving the trademark fish, and yeah, every day. It's beautiful life. It's just a healing process.
Yeah. And there's another example, and then this next one is showing you your very first works making that taught you about mold making. Is that right?
Yes. It's I just done a lot of mold making. So like this, it's it's called Caesar, and I think the culture from China, and put them the locals, the people put them on the gate.
And so coming back, you then came back to the wonderful School of Art in Canberra, and this was an important place for both of you. Julia, you were also at the ANU for a while, weren't you? Not at the School of Art. What were
No.
you? Can you tell us a little bit about what you were doing at the time?
So I was actually doing a PhD at the Research School of Asian Pacific Studies, which I think is something else these days.
Yes.
And when Ken was at the School of Art, I was actually in Sydney. We had one of those great relationships that results in a lot of Murray bus tickets, the Sydney-Canberra commute.
Yeah.
So I was actually teaching at the University of New South Wales.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. And Ken, the School of Art was an important place for you at this time, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Can
it's
you tell us a bit?
actually this art school changed my life, and yeah, I was really workaholic when I was a master student over there for 2 years, and yeah, just to keep making. This is my first work. It's called Fumie Tile. Made thousands of tiles featured Australian endangered butterflies. I got helped by an entomologist, CSRO in Black Mountain, Canberra, and his name is Kim Poland. he helped me a lot of information about Australian endangered butterflies, and just keep making. And I lost my weight 10 kilos in 6 months.
Yes, very, very dedicated. And so this work that's to do with the endangered butterflies, in fact, I think the person who helped you was actually there, came to have a look at the exhibition yesterday. But this is a performance work that some of you in the audience participated in, I think. So we're going to show you in a minute. So these are the tiles that show all the different endangered butterflies. And it was really about these endangered species, and this is at the CSIRO, and we're now going to show you just a tiny bit of footage, and I think you might even recognise, a couple of you might recognise yourselves in the audience, or participators. So Bill's just going to put that very brief little bit of the performance on. So I think Gordon, you were just caught in that last little frame. But Gordon Bull from the School of Art, who was there, and that was a very important place for Ken. But so after all that time of making those tiles, the point was then to make it ephemeral and for people to actually think about what it means that endangered species isn't just an easy thing that we talk about, that it's something real. So it was a courageous, performance work, and just showing you a few of the other images. But you can see how the tiles really did get quite smashed up. I must admit, I think it must have been a bit hard being the audience in this one, actually participating in breaking the works, but it made a very powerful comment, and I think really shows you something about where the work was moving towards. So we're now looking at this image of Okinawa, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about the interface between art and science and how this relates to the slide that we're looking at the moment, please.
We both really interested in environment issues. I think we both got anxiety, and we working quite often with environmental issues as a theme, and then each project needs something assistance with scientists, entomologists, marine biologists, and this time I made a reef, coral reef out of sugar, because we experienced Okinawa and also Great Barrier Reef and Fiji and Cancun in Mexico, and the beautiful coral is actually bleached and dead around the world because of many factors. Global warming's major factor, and also sugar industry. In Okinawa, it's the biggest sugar industry in Japan, and always the river runoff contains chemicals, and agricultural chemicals kill coral immediately. And I saw a very interesting documentary film, SBS, and it's called Muddy Water. And one marine biologist, she was researching about sugar industry with coral death. And I flew to, when I was the student of NU, I flew to Townsville to see her and got more information about river runoff in Queensland. And here it's a massive sugar cane. It's much bigger scale than Okinawans. And Australia is the second biggest sugar exporter. And the Great Barrier Reef also got suffered with the issue. And then used the sugar to make an artwork.
So I might just flick forward to the artwork itself here. So some of you may have seen this at the Venice Biennale in 2009, I think. A very beautiful work that also had a performance component. So maybe, Julia, you could tell us a little bit about what the performance component involved. So it was actually, again, getting people to participate and think about what the issues were. Can you tell us about the relationship with the sugar and the coral reef too?
Yeah, so I guess the sugar was a broader metaphor as well for consumption, and Ken started looking at the history of sugar. There's a really interesting book called Sugar and Power, which goes into that, and its relationship to the Industrial Revolution and colonialism. And yeah, I think it can become a wider metaphor for those kind of issues as well. Now in the Barrier Reef, I guess coal is a big issue as well. Yeah, so Ken was using sugar, and we had a performance with some beautiful Italian models. There were a few people, I think, who were coming back to the exhibition to have a bit of a perv as well. But so I think Ken was playing on the idea of beauty, and how beauty is also used to be sold, you know, to sell sugar products, and the idea of the wedding kind of with the beautiful cake. And so people were given cake as well during the opening, and that was a part of the process, I guess, while they were eating the sugar while looking at the work. And I think that's what we try and explore as well, is with environmental issues. It's not just kind of narrating or dictating a particular stance. It's kind of also trying to say, well, yeah, this is a little bit more complex. We're all involved in the process. And yeah, so people are actually thinking about their own actions as well, as you say, with the familiar tiles too.
Yeah, that's right. It becomes a very active thing, but it's an interesting way of drawing people in and making us realise that it's part of our daily lives. So we're now moving on to another work, and this is when Ken and Julia had well and truly started collaborating, and global warming is over if you want it. And here we have Ken and Julia in Fed Square as Yoko Ono and John Lennon in bed together. And in fact, they swapped roles. We have a bearded Yoko there, and
yeah, we started off as you know, I was Yoko and Ken was John, but there was something wrong with that, so we thought it might be better to put it the other way. It somehow worked better, I think. With
more people came.
so yeah,
I
make a much better John than Yoko, I'm sure.
And you know, so again, really raising issues, but also I think having you know, John Lennon and Yoko, I think that some of those ideas that they were talking about, singing about, are still very current today. So you know, raising them and how things have kind of developed. You know, that some of the things that they were talking about have only got kind of worse, dare we say, in terms of global warming. So, but again, bringing the human element into it, you know, and bringing some humour, the carbon cap and the night cap them at night in Fed Square there. And Ken, now we're moving on to another work, which so this is the Ultra Buddha work. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about, I think Australians, maybe it's just me, but I wasn't so familiar with this character, Ultraman. We might go on to Ultraman. Can you tell us about that and what Ultraman is doing at Lake Mungo?
It's very hard to explain about this work, but our interest in it's actually Julia's mother's house got Buddha statue in the home, and I was very interested in the Buddha statue in a home. Yeah, it's quite unusual in Japan, but I think the people really need, got healed by something, like a Buddha and yoga or something from this world. It's and I decided to make.
So Ultraman has that same kind of role within Japanese popular culture, I guess.
That he's a bit of a savior, a bit like a Superman.
Yeah. And this photo in Lake Mungo, the temperature is it's negative. It's minus.
Yeah, Ultra Buddha was actually very freezing standing on that.
And that is Ken, Ultra Buddha.
It was, I was skinnier.
Gold lame is not very protective when it's minus 3 degrees.
And then Julia actually, we got 1 year old baby on her back. She is taking photos in the middle of the desert.
Yeah. So and Lake Mungo is a very special place too, isn't it? You know, it's a very beautiful environment spiritual. And very spiritual. And I think this idea of purifying and healing the land being part of it. But we're now moving on to some issues to do with the preservation of the land and irrigation. And could you take us into the environment that we're now looking at, which is in the Murray-Darling, and tell us a little bit about this project and how, because it relates very strongly to the work that we're going to see in NGA Contemporary. Yeah,
so it was funny when we were at Lake Mungo, which is pretty much in the middle of nowhere. And then we got back to the closest town, and your phone kind of suddenly the reception comes in, and we were getting all these beepings about 20 different missed calls, and it was from a curator called Helen Vivian, who, funnily enough, was just in the next town, Mildura. And she called us up. She was really interested in trying to get us to come to Mildura. She'd seen Ken's work in the Biennale with salt and with sugar, and she really wanted us to do something with salt. So eventually we managed to get there, which was really great, thanks to a lot to her efforts as well. And this is some vineyards in Mildura. You can see what the irrigation has done in terms of enabling, amazing agricultural products. And at the same time, I guess the story of Mildura and irrigation has always also been a struggle against the factors of the Australian environment, and in particular salt. So when the land is irrigated, then the groundwater has risen up, and here you can see vineyards in the background, but in the foreground is an area where the salt has just risen up, and the ecosystem has basically collapsed.
So we're seeing some more of the slides just showing the effects of salinity.
This is also the effect of drought. So this one is what happens after the tap has been turned off. We just got to Mildura after the long 10-year drought, It was funny, the first day we got there, it was pouring with rain, and Helen said, "Oh, you better take a picture of the rain. It's going to be the first time, probably the last time you'll see it rain." And then it just rained. So we wanted to look at the salt issue, and we discovered when we were there, which I had no knowledge of, is something called the Salt Interception Scheme, which I'm not sure how many people have heard of it, but actually about 500,000 tonnes of groundwater is pumped out of the region around the Murray-Darling and then pumped a couple of kilometres away to try and stop it from seeping into the river every year. So this is one of those interception points near Mildura, and this is the groundwater that has been pumped a couple of kilometres away from the river itself. And there's one company called Murray River Salt that actually harvests this salt and turn it into beautiful gourmet salt flakes that you can eat. So we got their cooperation to use their salt.
Yeah, so quite incredible to see these, huge deposits of salt that in fact you then began to work with. Just before we move on to your works, could you just tell us a little bit about the image that we're looking at here, because in fact this was very related to the project with Helen Vivian.
Yes, so this is the Rio Vista house in Mildura that was built by the Chaffee brothers, who were actually Canadian, but they had irrigated areas in California, and they had this vision of Australia also becoming a land of kind of agricultural wonders, and came to Mildura with this vision and were quite persistent about, enacting this in the Mildura region, and were really successful, but at the same time they were always struggling with the problems of salinity and water, lack of water,
Yeah, and the idea of sort of wanting to create a food bowl, in this environment. And this is actually a shot of the interior of the house with the dining table, which would actually get replaced with a rather different looking table. It was Ken and Julia's, it was one of your really first works in salt. So can you tell us about that?
So we started looking at how we could use salt within a work, and we thought, well, we can try and make produce out of salt that is comes from Mildura, and we wrote a list of what kind of things Mildura produces, so obviously oranges, grapes. As we were writing the list, we kind of realised that we were writing a list of a still life work. And then we looked into the history of the still life and found that was really apt in terms of what we were looking at. So we turned it into a table, which was the first big salt work.
Yeah, so it didn't actually come very easily. Maybe you can tell us a bit, when you started working with salt, it wasn't a simple thing to come up with these solid objects,
Yeah, it's ridiculously difficult to handle with, and sugar was much easier.
Right.
But the salt is hard to make it, harden. And it took a long time. We made thousands of test pieces, and we made the big tabletop first, and it's weight 100 kilos. And then I asked the director of the residency and to lift it up, and then it smashed, and
the whole thing just crumbled.
Collapsed. And but eventually, Julia is a good researcher, and found a good recipe, and we made successful pieces in 6 months later. Yeah, I cried because it's like found a tiny a diamond digging the underground for 10 years.
So that's how it felt, like finding a diamond after digging for 10 years to have a couple of salt pieces that actually held together. But I think this idea of, the tradition of still life and the idea of the symbolism underlying it is, as you say, was very apt. And you can think of all the great, the history of still life and banqueting. In fact, one of the things we want to do next year is to put on a film series about banqueting, going up to people like Peter Greenaway and, the cook, the thief, his wife and lover. But, it's a very interesting and rich tradition that continues, that Ken and Julia have been continuing to work on. And so we're seeing some other examples here, and then this idea of taking it further. So actually thinking about the creation of a long banquet table. So, excuse the expression, but I think one could say suckers for punishment, considering how long and how hard it is actually working with salt. So was this particular image, is this when you went to Hazelhurst?
Yeah, the director is not happy there. Ken is just getting salt over everything. He's grinding away, and she's saying, I think you guys have made enough already by now, haven't you? Yeah.
So they had a residency at Hazelhurst, where the regional gallery, where there's a wonderful studio for artists to work in, and I think
that's us taking over their stockroom, as you can see.
So great image there of this huge production of wanting to create this white banquet out of salt. And I think there is the sense of a real labour of love. But getting back to, that idea that when we looked at Ken's images of working at Okinawa with the master, this thing of the discipline and the dedication and, to actually arrive at the larger work.
It's much easier. You don't have to put them in the kiln.
Yeah, except like all of our equipment, drills, grinders, everything, they just fall apart. They get rusty and then they fall apart after about a week.
One interesting thing we found out, the sugar actually, I eventually got allergy with sugar powder, but the salt is, it was okay,
Yeah, so here we have the big banquet table, like the one you're going to see at NGA Contemporary, and look at all the detail of the grapes, the oysters, and so the food started with the idea of the Murray-Darling and the food bowl, but then it expanded, didn't it? I mean, I noticed that we even have cupcakes in salt.
So there was this really delicious Portuguese bakery right near where we were working in Hazelhurst. I think while we were working with salt was actually when the Fukushima disaster happened, and we started thinking about food in a different way as well. Everyone was like, oh, we shouldn't eat food from Japan now, and things like that. So we were kind of looking at food and the environment and toxicity more kind of broadly as well, rather than just the salinity issue, which is why we wanted, we decided to call it the Last Supper and kind of look at it and kind of much bigger picture thing. Yeah.
So that whole play on the Last Supper, and I remember you saying, one way of looking at this is like, the great banquets, but the other way is also a bit like Armageddon, so an interesting reading, like the salt at the end of the world, and this amazing feat of creating this banquet table out of salt. And one of the things that we talked about was the different layers of meaning in different cultures of salt. There are a lot of superstitions around salt and biblical stories, but interestingly in Japan, it's also quite a sacred substance. So you get these many layers. But Ken, I think you also had an interesting reading on the Last Supper in terms of people in Japan being asked what they want for their last meal before they die. Is that right?
Yeah, it's in TV programs sometimes the reporter asked someone walking on the street, and if you have a last meal, so what do you want? It's an interesting question, Yeah.
Yes, so what would your last meal be? And here we have the venue for the exhibition where a number of works were shown before they came to the National Gallery. So we're getting towards the end of the talk, but we're looking at the Abbey in France, and maybe you could tell us how this came about. This is the salt table that you're going to see in NGA Contemporary, looking a little different in our building to this very old environment, but doesn't it look quite spectacular there? So can you tell us a little bit about this project just before we got the works here?
So we just got an email. Actually, it was really funny. She sent us an email, the director of the Abbey. She'd seen our work because we were just in a residency in Germany. She'd seen our work just on the website, and she sent us this beautiful, long, very polite email in French, which Ken subsequently put into the junk box. Yeah, because he just thought it was junk mail. And then
I couldn't read French.
Yeah.
And
Well,
luckily, she sent it again after she didn't get a reply. So that was lucky. And so we had this amazing opportunity to show in this beautiful abbey, which has an amazing history of its own. It was an abbey, and then in the Second World War, it actually was owned by the Rothschilds, so they used it to store Jewish artifacts from the Nazis. So it has this amazing history, and actually this room that you're looking at now had an original Last Supper relief on the walls. So when they contacted us, we were in the middle of making the Last Supper, so it was really the ideal place to show it.
lots of coincidence happened. I had a dream, and we exhibited our works exactly the same place like that.
Yeah, wow.
And then got an email and then put it in the junk box. But, still.
Well,
So we decided to call the exhibition Another Dream, which was actually a quote from a Kurosawa movie. And we showed a Kurosawa movie called Dreams. We actually showed it together with the exhibition because they have he has a dream that's really a total premonition of Fukushima in that movie as well. So it's all about kind of premonitions and dreams and different realities. And
yeah, so I know that we've got to move along, but I think it's interesting just to mention these salt frames, the empty salt frames. We have these in the exhibition at NGA Contemporary, and they work very well in the space. But can you tell us about the five senses just briefly, please? What was the idea of emptying out?
It's all these five senses project also linked to Last Supper, Still Life, and the Bruegel's the paintings also really we really interested in, and historically and also conceptually, and the Still Life painting was kind of we can say contemporary art in the era, and lots of exotic the food imported from their colonial countries all over the world, and then their diet dramatically changed, and the lots of meaning collapsed. Like they used honey, but instead they taking sugar. And we interested in the painting of five senses, and also our five senses, very important. But in the modernized world, they all fading, and so we just mimicking the painting, but it's all up to viewers, and viewers can imagine.
They need their sixth sense.
They need a sixth sense to see inside, and we just made the salt frames.
Yeah.
And then in Abbey de Maubuisson, the place we exhibited is actually the special the rooms for nuns. They actually couldn't speak in a room, so it's really matching the space.
Something very, very quiet, and this idea of emptying out and this fullness and emptiness being something that runs through a lot of your work, and the detail from the allegory of the five senses after Rubens and Bruegel is actually in the frame itself rather than in the picture. But, you know, very interesting, this history of art and history of food, you know, something I think a few artists like Fiona Hall too have been very interested in. But this is another work which is in the current exhibition, the Grape Chandelier, which is made out of, was cast over quite a lot of grapes. How many was it, Julia?
5,000 cast.
5,000 grapes it took. Yeah. And again, you know, questioning that sort of idea of abundance and plenty, but then what does the food we eat, you know, questioning that whole thing, and but, you know, doing it in an extraordinary way. And we decided we couldn't quite match, you know, this idea of the Abbey and looking through, but we did hang the chandelier quite low at NGA Contemporary so that people passing by can get allured and drawn into the space. And just before we move off the salt works, also with this idea of consumerism, Ken and Julia actually did, to accompany the Last Supper, we don't really have this here, although there are some of their artworks are for sale in the shop, but this is the Last Supper market. So can you tell us about this?
Yeah, so we had a great opportunity to have a booth at Melbourne Art Fair, and we wanted to kind of play on the idea of the art fair, where the artwork really becomes quite objectified, and you feel like you're in a bit of a supermarket sometimes. So yeah, it was the art supermarket, supper market, where we made a lot of fruit and oysters and lemons, and yeah, there's a couple that were the leftovers from the supper market are now available at NGA, so that's a great home for them too. So yeah.
Yes, well, they are actually really quite beautiful objects, you know, so I recommend them to you. But then to move on to, we've already alluded to the question of Fukushima, and I think the image on the slide. Can you tell us what that is?
That's the explosion, I think, of the reactor number three.
Yeah, 1 and 3. This is the 3.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. So this was the Fukushima nuclear power plant accident that happened that, you know, was of great concern for Ken with his family and also for people in Japan. And yeah.
So we were thinking of what materials we could possibly use that related to that, and
well, it happened. We are in Australia. Yeah.
You were in Australia when it happened, and you were
and then you know, in ABC TV, ABC News, the emperor, Japanese emperor, turned out and then made a long speech. And Julia is a historian. She said it's the first time after Japan defeated the World War II. He made a long speech, and it's really serious. And then we freaked out, and
Yeah, so trying to think about what materials you might use to respond to this disaster and have something consistent with your practice. So we're looking at here, I think it's glass made of uranium.
So it's uranium glass called, or Vaseline glass, depression glass. And it's glass with a tiny bit of uranium, which was originally used to colour the glass in the early 20th century.
Yeah, so looking at some of those objects that are used, and then you had this, and this particular slide, maybe you'd just like to mention what that
So
is?
first of all, we were looking at doing a work that related to uranium mining in Australia, because there's an obvious connection there between Australia and Japan with uranium mining. And this is actually Ranger Mine. We went up to the Northern Territory and did some research. and got funding from Arts New South Wales, I think, to do a show, Gallery 4A in Sydney. So yeah, these are just the mines in Australia. We went up to Ranger and Nabarlek, right up the top of, in Arnhem Land. We were interested in the story of the green ants, which comes from this uranium mining site. And was actually, this story was used by Herzog in this movie, but he turns it into a desert story. It's actually a story from Arnhem Land. And this site that had incredibly rich uranium, it was so rich that they managed to mine the site in about 3 years, the entire site. And a lot of that uranium went to Japan as well as France. And so we used the story of the green ant. That's us visiting Ranger Mine. That's Ken with his Geiger counter.
I got paranoia, so I got a Geiger counter, and then taking with me every day.
This is crossing the Alligator River into Arnhem Land, which is really beautiful. And that's the town close to the Nabarlek mine. And so this is the work we made, which was a 6-metre ant. It's really hard to get. I think this is actually a really beautiful work, and we've only shown it once, unfortunately, but it's really hard to get that sense of kind of ephemeral, like ethereal.
And again, this dreamlike, the really dreamlike quality that comes through also in the chandelier, but again, very political work and looking at the traditions of the land. And if you think back to what we were talking about with Lake Mungo, I think this is an interesting extension of some of those ideas and tackling the issues that were facing, Indigenous people and what was happening to their land, and taking into account their stories.
Yeah, we're interested in the story. It's a kind of premonition. The indigenous peoples. So it's like Japanese in pop culture, it's called Godzilla, and it's kind of same story, but it's real one. And actually from Nabarlek mining, they exported to Japan as a fuel. And then in Fukushima, definitely used that the fuel.
We're interested in the dreaming as well, because Indigenous stories, that the time is not the future and the past is not so defined, and the idea of the future being in the past and the past in the future. When you go to Arnhem Land and you hear the stories, and a guide that we had, he's like, people say the mimis are just spirits, but they are not. They are actually here, And the idea that the story of the ant is we say premonition, but it's time, which is not dictated by kind of this idea of progress.
Linear, yeah. And there's another shot of this beautiful work. And these words, I think, speak for themselves in terms of the concerns that Ken and Julia had. And we're now moving on to the final part, which is about the chandeliers, which you're going to see in the back of the NGA space. But Ken or Julia, either of you, could you tell us so how the idea of the chandelier came about? Where were these images that you saw of chandeliers?
We are in London, and we're wondering what's artwork to make for responding to Fukushima, and coincidentally, so we are in London and walking on the street, and the beautiful chandelier everywhere, especially for like a hotel. Luxury hotels, and also many brand shops, and we got idea to produce chandelier, big chandeliers.
So I think the amazing thing, is that you get these very opulent chandeliers that are, and the whole history of the chandelier became of interest to you. But then, and this actually looks quite similar, but I wanted to show the chandeliers as they are to then get a sense of what Ken and Julia have done with the chandeliers. Because you told me, you sourced a lot of these antique chandeliers, but I think in Portugal, someone was the person who sold it to you. Maybe you can tell me the story again?
Yeah, so we went to lots of different markets around Europe. This is actually a residency we were on in Berlin, and we had no space. So we were trying to get the directors of the residency to loan us the big hall to use to hang the chandelier so we could make the work, and they wouldn't. They said it was we couldn't use it, so we had to hang the chandelier from our bed. That's you can see in the next photo.
So that's actually the chandelier.
That's actually our bed on top of that chandelier.
We purchased the antique chandelier from antique shops and then took all the beautiful original beads off and then put the uranium glasses on it. And then next day we took all the beautiful beads back to the shop, and then we couldn't communicate in English, just give them back. But
he thought we were very strange.
He's so confused. I can't pay you back.
Can't bring the original crystals back that they didn't need. But a very clever way of actually combining again this whole theme that we've seen running through of consumer goods, the world we live in, drawing people into that, but also then having this message of showing the idea of radiation, even though this is completely safe because they're only small traces of uranium in the glass beads, but then also bringing in the purple lights, which, I'll come back to that in a second, which fluoresce, help the green beads to fluoresce. But the idea, so the work in the back part of NGA Contemporary is called Crystal Palace, the great exhibition of all nuclear nations of the world. Can you tell us about the link with the Crystal Palace, please?
So first of all, we just had an idea to make one chandelier, but our projects have this terrible habit of getting really big really quickly. And then we thought of, I think it might have been your bad idea, Ken, to look at
we just made one chandelier. I was happy, but the night she said, I got a good idea. Wow. Always in the midnight, she's starts saying, speaking about our project, and then I got a good idea. And many countries got a nuclear power plant, and we should make all the countries.
One for each country.
One for each countries. And how many? She says 30. I got shocked and then almost fainted.
So then we thought of the idea of the World Expo, and that came to the Crystal Palace in the UK. Although when we were in France, the French were actually very not happy with us using the idea of the UK, because they said, did you know that actually the Crystal Palace was originally in France, that England was just copying us? So, but in any case, this idea of imperialism and wealth and power and showing off the industry of the colonies. So we just used that idea, and obviously crystal references back to the glass, and
and that whole wonderful layering again of possible meanings. And then the fate of the
Crystal Palace, which when you look at the images, the next image, and then the image after it, which is actually Fukushima, just they kind of seemed to double over for us.
Yes, these strange coincidences. And here we have, a much bigger installation of the Crystal Palace work by Ken and Julia. And again, a bit like that, the salt table, starting off with a few and ending up with plenty, and looking at that, the idea of the scale of the chandeliers is important. Why is that? Ken, what does the scale refer to?
It's depend on the output of nuclear power plants. in each countries. And the biggest one is, of course, United States in the middle. And the next one, next largest one in France. And third, Japan. But Japan stopped all the nuclear power plants after the accident, and then restarted just a month ago. Just one nuclear power plant in Kyushu area. And yes, the size actually pretty much depend on output.
Yeah,
So this is the opportunity we had at Singapore Biennale to show all of which actually ended up being 31 because Iran also opened up a nuclear power plant.
So, you know, a lot of interesting politics, and I think our Learning and Access team are going to have a great time working with this show. In fact, we realised when we were installing the work at NGA Contemporary with all those flags of the different nations of the world is kind of an interesting link there. But they are spectacular, and, you know, putting up France in this building was something we thought was important to make a link between NGA here and NGA Contemporary, and to encourage people to go and have a look at the works. And I think we might finish with the next slide, if that's all right, of the, I think that's rather spectacular, and then we have a few more of, just to give you a full sense of it, just that, you know, and the design of each one is quite distinctive as well. Did that have a reference to the countries that you were working with in terms of the shape and the look of them?
Yeah, so the one right up there is Iran, but the chandelier actually comes from Syria.
Ah, and that was interesting, wasn't it? Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so each chandelier has a kind of history, and that one we got at a shop in Berlin. Syrian refugees, it was their last chandelier that they had before the war started. They managed to get it out, so.
Yeah. And then that just shows you the full complement of the works. I mean, we obviously in NGA Contemporary couldn't show all of these, but we have 8 in that space, and the one in the building here. So, you know, really quite a feat. And, you know, I hope that in this talk, going back, looking at the early work and the journey that you've travelled on from that first slide of Tokyo, where you were both born, I should mention that we're very grateful that the Australia-Japan Foundation have contributed to this exhibition, and also to a performance that will be happening with Enlighten next year, that Ken and Julia are going to come back to Australia and actually make an edible work. So do look out for that, and the exhibition will be open during Enlighten. It just seems to fit the theme so well. But I'd now like to take this opportunity to really thank Ken and Julia for their wonderful, inspiring work that makes us think, that entices us and challenges us, and to thank them for being here for the last couple of weeks and working with us, with the NGA team. And they've actually brought their children to Australia, and I couldn't quite believe it, but enrolled them in school here. Hello. So that's been great, you know, to actually experience something of Canberra life again, and you have a history with this place, and I hope that you'll continue to do that. But thank you very much for talking through your work with us so eloquently today. Please join me in thanking Ken and Julia. Actually, I'm not sure all children have such creative parents, and after 2 weeks, I think one of your daughters apparently won an art prize at the school for an environmental project. I mean, how lucky were they? But actually, I can't resist. We were in this space just before when we were setting up, and a couple of amusing things. I didn't realise that Ken actually, Julia's father told me is quite a funny guy, and we found out when we were meeting with our director just a couple of things, that Ken has a Geiger counter in his watch, so when he was flying over a particular part of Russia it went off. But the other thing is, are you still prepared to finish off with, he's looking at me aghast with your moon dance? Come on, do it for us, and then we'll go down to NGA Contemporary.
We've been listening to too much Canberra radio, all the 1980s. Michael Jackson, he's been practicing his moonwalk ever since we came.
Every night, did exercise.
Are you going to do it, Ken?
You're going to do it for us?
Yeah,
You have to take your
really.
microphone off.
Sure.
Turn it off.
Thank you.
Turn it off first. Turn the whole thing off.
All right, so while Ken's getting ready, do come down and join us at NGA Contemporary. Thank you.